This week, we got a new moon in Gemini making its way alongside some healing that's going to ask us to stay rooted in the body, as Jupiter and Chiron are still in a conversation. And as that new moon in Gemini makes its way, we also got the opening of Gemini season, not just with the sun being there, but also Mercury, where it likes to hang out and play. So this is the weekly forecast for May 21st through 27th, what I'm calling putting dreams into action. So let's get into it. All right, y'all, welcome back to Yappin with the Stars, the show where I talk about life and spirit with the help of the planets, stars, and zodiacs, and a little bit of common sense thrown in there as well. I'm your host and guide, Dr. Nicole Rouse, artist, astrologer, and anthropologist, and all-around dreamer. And here we do astrology and anthropology my way, grounded in the body, tied to spirit, and connected to the world we live in, or my trinity, as I like to call it. Sound spiritual practice needs a strong structural analysis, grounded in a cultural context, okay? So every Wednesday we check into the chaos we call society and ask two questions. What's the cosmos showing us this week? And what are we being called to move, create, burn, or build? So let's get into it. Now, as always, we're going to start with the weekly forecast, go into a little bit of astrology kind of one-on-one mixed with some testifying, because again, we got to put these astrology transits into context. And the best way we do that as humans is through stories. And then we're going to end with some yapping to see what does all of this mean when we put it into the mundane, the real world, okay? Now, the weekly forecast for this week is a lot of Gemini. A lot of Gemini. We are opening up the crossroads because Mercury is making its way home. Now, at the beginning of this week, remember, we go Wednesday to Wednesday here, the day of Mercury. And no, I'm not Mercury ruled, but I got a lot of respect for the planet that knows how to transfer things from the sacred to the mundane. And we're going to get into the conversation about Mercury a little bit later in the show today. But this week, the moon starts off in Pisces and ends in Gemini, because again, Wednesday to Wednesday. Now, last week, we talked about how the moon was moving through the end of the zodiac, and that aligned really well with a few planets at the end of their cycle, namely Saturn in Pisces. And this week, we're going to see Saturn finally make its way into Aries. And as a way to prepare this, the moon, the representation of the body and our emotions. And if you go back, I think 2 episodes, I did a whole kind of flow of consciousness breakdown about the representation of the moon and what it means. This week, we are having the moon have us complete a cycle in Pisces and then move us into this cycle of having to sit with the self, our needs, and then how we communicate them. So we're going from Pisces into Gemini, and that makes sense because we're ending this week on a new moon in Gemini, okay? Now, before we get to that new moon, we are still in a couple of conversations. The main one is Jupiter in Gemini is still trining Chiron is still sextiling Chiron in Aries. Now, why does this matter? Well, we're still having to do some healing, okay? Chiron's been in Aries for a while, and because Chiron is kind of a generational planet as well. It's a dwarf planet. It's the planet that helps us understand our wombs that we have in childhood, and once we can face them as we become older, right, that can be a source of healing for ourselves and for others. Now, Jupiter in Gemini, again, is this abundance of information, abundance of communication, an abundance of having us sit with the fact that can we grapple with dualities of life? Because again, Gemini is a dualistic entity, is a dualistic sign that is telling us that things aren't really just black and white. There's a whole lot of gray. So then where is your discernment? How do you discern the information that you're getting? So this Jupiter, Gemini, Chiron, Aries conversation is really having us grapple with our identities. And I've talked about this before, not just on the show, but in generally in my work, is I really believe, based upon the ways that we are seeing society move the last few decades, that identity is breaking. The constructs put upon our bodies, what we call things like race, class, gender, and the like, really are breaking because the foundations of those constructs were never solid to begin with. And when we think about how we have been told who we are, how we are marked in society, first, when you come out of that womb, literally, whoever gave you birth, once you are out of that womb, you then get a piece of paper that we call a birth certificate that designates your different traits that are important for for the state to be able to record. This is not some conspiracy theory, y'all. Like, it literally is just the way that the state collects data on us, knows its citizens, is through things like birth certificates and census. You have to enumerate, you mark, you classify. So those classifications then, when they are placed upon us, then become a location that we then are taught to perform. So when you are born, so I'll take myself as an example. I was born at birth, designated as a woman, as a girl, right? I had a race, which was black. I had a name, I had a height, I had all those things, right? And then as I was born, or as I was growing up, those identities then were the ways that I was trained to engage with society. All of us are like this, okay? This is what I call identity scripts that are placed upon the body so that we learn how to engage with society. But as we grow, y'all, then you start to ask some questions. Does this work for me? Is this actually me? Does this make sense? Or are these boxes put around my body, are they confining me? And if they're confining me, then how do I break them so that I can actually sit more in the me? We're having this ongoing conversation because the idea of the self, the idea of a sense of self, right? This Aries energy is going to be really active for a while, since Neptune is hanging out there for the next, 10, 12 years. And Saturn will be making its way later on into the week into that sign for the next 2.5 years, starting a new cycle once again, a new 28.5-year cycle. There's a way that we are being both given permission, but also space to ask ourselves, who are we? And then do we dare to dream and reimagine that answer if the constructs that we are performing really don't allow us to fully express and live, okay? Now, on the 21st, then, we have the sun making its way into Gemini. So we get Gemini season starting, all right? So we got Jupiter and Gemini, again, having this conversation with Chiron and Aries. And at the same time, now we're going to get the sun, our sense of self, our ego, how we understand and shine, right? The way that we enact the body is making its way into the sign of duality, into the sign of the crossroads, into the sign of communication, the twins, okay? And so the sun is moving into air. Gemini is masculine air, ruled by Mercury. Now, while the sun moves there, we are also having Mars still in this trine with Venus. So again, we got a couple of conversations still occurring. Jupiter's sextile Chiron, and then we got Mars trining Venus, which it was last year. And it's going to be in a trine for a while, y'all. Even if it's a quote-unquote looser trine, these two are having a conversation. And they're having a conversation when they're in the modality or the element of fire. So we have Sun and Gemini, Mars and Venus and fire. We are being introduced to the elements of air and fire that we are all going to be collectively sitting in once Uranus makes its way into Gemini this summer, because then we're going to have all the outer planets now shifted away from elements of of earth and water that we've had for a long time into fire and air. Pluto in Aquarius, air. Neptune in Aries, fire. And then once Uranus makes its way into Gemini in July for a bit, we're going to get air. And so that's the outer planets. So the most inner planets, which are going to be the sun, moon, which are the luminaries, but then also Mercury, Venus, and Mars. Those are the most inner planets, because Saturn and Jupiter are kind of inner outer planets that you can then put alongside the outer planets of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. So you get this balance of 5 and 5, inner planets, outer planets, and that's how I think about the planets being ideas of individual and structure. Right? Again, this duality. We are getting a preview personally of what it's going to feel like and also look like, taste like, smell like, to really sit in elements that are requiring us to take action. But what are we taking action on and why? Because fire is the igniter, but air is the discernment. Do we have the discernment to sit with and work with this fire? Because we are going to be called into some kind of action. But who and what actions are we doing and why? And are we grounded enough in the vessel that holds our spirit in order to figure out the way we want to move in this kind of light. And so when we see in the sun moving to Gemini alongside Mars trining Venus, right, we are really this is going to be a lot of energy of the self and reflecting upon how we communicate in this kind of duality of life. Okay. What are the actions that we are taking and what is actually right for us? Because this is going to be action. There can be a lot of reaction with this energy, right? Especially when we feel justified in our actions. And since Venus is in Aries, and I talked about this last week, so if you want to take a listen last week's episode for a little bit more context, when Venus is in Aries, it bends things. It bends gender, it bends concepts of relationships, it bends concepts of justice, the things that Venus represents. But it is in a sign that is considered at its detriment. But for me, I question, is it really detrimental, or is it giving Venus permission to enact the things that Venus knows it needs to do for their safety and security, for justice, right? Because again, Venus is ruled by Libra and Taurus. But when it moves, which is which is earth and water, but when it moves into fire, it's like, oh, I got to defend, right? There's a defensiveness. There is a need to enact something so that you can then go back and have that safety and security, okay? So can we work with the elements of fire, which is again ignition, action, and air, which is discernment, communication, right? So that we don't have these kind of things that we are seeing and hearing and feeling and experiencing in the public burn us up and whip us into a reactionary state. Can we allow ourselves to ground in our knowing, in our discernment, so that we know when things are being done that are purposely having us react versus knowing when it is time for us to take action? All right. Does that make sense, y'all? Let me know in the comments below if that's something that you are seeing in your life right now, and if you're feeling it. So this is why I talked about last week about Uranus and Taurus, and Uranus at its last degrees, really having us have to confront the most stagnant parts of our chart, which is going to be the house that Taurus rules for you. But in general, that's also the body, because again, Taurus is ruled by Venus. So Uranus is waking up the body, is waking us up. Literally, y'all, I think I talked about this a couple of episodes ago, but I've had a lot of inflammation that I've had to work through by changing kind of my diet and various things like that. But I still get these literal electricity shocks from my hip into my calf, and I had them last night to the point where literally I had to smoke some weed and lay down because it felt like my leg was on fire, right? And it reminded me of Uranus energy, Uranus electricity, Uranus shocking, Uranus change, Uranus the thing that ignites us, gets us to really understand that their action must be had. When we are having this Uranus energy at the last stages of Taurus, right, there's a way that the body is being awoken, is being woken up, so that we understand what it is we are truly feeling, what is happening to us, so that the actions we take are grounded in your reality, which is your body, and not just in reaction to a chaotic state. Okay, so, and this actually goes along with on the 24th, because Mercury will be conjunct Uranus in Taurus. Okay, so now we're going to get the planet of communication, the planet that is the crossroads, the planet that sits in the duality of life, meeting its higher octave. Because remember, Uranus is the higher octave of Mercury. So they're hanging out in the sign of Taurus. So here, I will say that don't be surprised if you have what I'm calling random bouts of communications with spirit. So what do I mean by that? Well, don't be surprised if there's like downloads, or if you get sudden ideas, or if there are things that are spoken either by you or others that you then can kind of get you in action, right? This is chaotic energy, but not necessarily always negative. It just is change. It's things that are unexpected. And there could be an unexpected sense of communication as well, because alongside this, we're going to have Pluto and Aquarius trining the sun in Gemini at 3 degrees. So while we have Mercury and Uranus and Taurus hanging out conjunct in 24 degrees, we're going to get Pluto and Aquarius that is still retrograde, okay? That is going to be trining the sun in Gemini at 3 degrees. degrees. So here, I will say I wouldn't be surprised if there is some kind of communication or information that comes out about something that the state has done that impacts the collective in some way, shape, or form, right? And the actions that we need to take. And I do believe that this is still this idea of us facing the patriarchy in the ways that we have been conditioned to give permission to those we consider in power. And what does that actually do to disempower, to not empower the collective? So I think there's going to be a lot of, I wouldn't be surprised because we have all these things going on right now, from the Diddy case in the US that really is taking a big highlight on our relationship again to violence and patriarchy and this idea of victimhood versus perpetrator that is really binary in nature, that is asking us to really grapple with our own relationship to power and violence. Okay, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later in the show. But that's just one example. Another example of this are this kind of constant reactions that the state in the U.S. is doing. Again, this is a U.S.-centric analysis for right now because I'm in the U.S. That's why. But we're seeing the ways that we kind of get these constant executive orders, these constant demands from the state. But when do we start to push back and say, not only is this not legal, it doesn't make any goddamn sense. Right? So legality and sense making, right, is really on the table right now. Who and what do we put our authority into and why? And what happens if we take it back? But you can only take your authority back when you take your body back, because that is what has been given up to another external entity, an external power, right? Whether it be a priest, a president, right, or an AI machine. If you are giving away your power, away your autonomy to something else external to you, there is a way that this energy, these kind of transits are really asking you to grapple with the question of, but does that actually benefit you? But do you even know what you need and want in order to have a benefit for you? Okay. Now, on the 25th, Saturn makes its way finally into Aries. Now, Saturn's been hanging out 29 degrees for a while. Like I said, the last few episodes, this to me is Saturn being washed through the deep waters of Pisces, having met Neptune and the North Node. So this to me is a transformation, a deep kind of drowning and rebirth of Saturn from the way that planet has been made a capitalistic patriarch to fit the modern constructions of the economic systems that we are all beholden to in the West. It is moving back into its state as the crone, the matriarch, but not as an old school understanding of the matriarch, because we are no longer in the past, we're in the present, but an understanding of the matriarch having been co-opted by patriarchy. Okay, so this means that with Saturn making its way into Aries, Saturn's like, okay, baby, now it's time to put into action all of the things that we have had to sit in and wade in the deep waters for a while. Not just the 2.5 years Saturn's been there, but the last, 12 to 14 years Neptune was there, because Neptune had us sitting in all kinds of delusions as a society, because Neptune likes to be in the deep waters of Pisces. But when we have been fed the illusions and imaginations from the state, from our oppressor, from those who need to co-opt and steal our imaginations and supplement it with their stories, their constructs, their imaginings of what a future can look like, right? So we had all these kind of very dystopian type of movies and types of understandings of the future where it was really white and hetero, a future where even when there was quote unquote diversity represented, it was just a kind of nod to what society was saying they wanted, but really there was no depth, right? So we were sitting in the illusions and the imaginations of a state that doesn't like us. And so now that Neptune's drying out in Aries, we're seeing the revelations of these stories just being nothing more than stories, historical fantasy to fit, again, a state that needs us to buy into it. Saturn's there now saying, okay, now that you believe it and you've had to kind of grapple with authority and time and the idea of our responsibility collectively to be able to imagine something new, Saturn and Aries now at the beginning of a new cycle is saying, okay, then boo, what we gonna do? What does it mean to take the lessons and dreams and put them into action? What dreams have grown up and what is required of us to make them a reality? So this is about the responsibility of the self as it impacts our ability to transform the collective. And when I say the responsibility of the self, there is a responsibility to being human, y'all. But we have, again, been really trained and conditioned over the past few centuries, because God was the foundation of the colonial project, to give up that authority, to give up that most essence of our connection to what we call creator, God, something else outside of us. We were taught to give that up, which is the self. So the responsibility to be human means we have a responsibility to ourselves. Again, Saturn ruling discipline and time and tradition. But it's since Saturn's properties, the actual planet itself is not solid, it is gas. This idea that tradition is stagnant, that culture does not move, does not make sense. We must adapt, we must move, we must quote unquote evolve. But evolution is not always in this kind of progressive forward motion. That's the illusion that colonial time has presented to us. So Saturn says, because again, Saturn also rules time. You take your time back. You take your authority back. You take your understanding of you have a responsibility to enact your own self back. Then what do you do? What do you do, baby? This is going to be a long conversation, so we're going to keep having this conversation for the next 2.5 years. But it's a new cycle. It's a new cycle at a time that we're also being asked to plant new seeds, because a day later, the 26th, we get the new moon in Gemini at 6 degrees, with the ruler of that moon, Mercury, being in its home sign of Gemini at 2 degrees. And all of that's going to be having a conversation in some way, shape, or form with Pluto in Aquarius, that is still retrograde at 3 degrees. So this is about a new way to communicate. But remember that authority and power is always at play. Sun, Gemini, moon there as well. So the relationship we have to ourselves, but also to the understandings of the patriarch and understandings of the matriarch, right? Having this idea of next to Mercury, which is communication, having this conversation with the collective. And it's not just the collective living, it's also the collective dead. Pluto's lord of the underworld, Aquarius is a collective. When those two have a conversation, like I said before, it's ushering in not just the collective of all of us, but also our collective dead. So we need to have a new way of communicating, a new way of understanding our relationship to information and communication, especially when we're at the crossroads of society. Again, Mercury being the crossroads. So this is about choice. You got to choose. So what is leading? Which mind leads and why? Okay. Deep transformation as a collective level is asking us to really shift, bend, or reconsider tradition and its values. And that's the work of Pluto for the next 18 years. It's going to have us go through a death and rebirth cycle collectively. And so when we're talking about things like Aquarius and technologies, if we're bringing new technologies in, have we understood the old ones that are the foundations of where we are going? Right? And so for me, this is an ongoing conversation about communication and our relationship to technologies, especially things like AI, but also our relationship to information that we get from those in authority. So again, this is authority making, authority taking. And if we take our authority back by taking our communication, our ability to communicate back, then what it is do we create? So the key is to be grounded in your knowing. This is truly about air. This is all air energy, y'all. Whose knowing is leading and why? This is Mercury. Again, whose knowing is leading so that you can make the choice for you and not the one that others want you to do. This is why you have trickster energy at the crossroad. Mercury is also the trickster. So on this new moon, yes, it's about planting new seeds. It's about new ways of communicating, but it's air. What are you grounded in? And if we're not grounded in the body, because what is the other co-ruler of Mercury? Virgo. What's going on in Virgo? You got a south node hanging out, because we're in a south node Virgo, north node Pisces transit. I ain't talked about this for a minute, but that is very active across all of this. As we plant new seeds and new ways of communication and having to grapple with a new understanding of the self and its relationship to these so-called new technologies, if we have not even grappled with the main technology we have, which is our body, that gives us the discernment and knowing, then how the hell are we going to be able to work with, these external technologies that many have now given their authority and power up to when we have not even learned how to believe ourselves. So it's another transference of power. So this new moon in Gemini with Mercury alongside Pluto, what needs to die in our relationship to communication so that we can actually embody the knowing that will allow us to make the decisions for ourselves individually and collectively? Okay, so that's the weekly forecast. But let's get into, I've been talking about Mercury a lot. Okay, so let's now turn to Astrology 101 and really get more into Mercury, because this is what I call the crossroad planet. Now, Mercury is the messenger planet. Okay, it's the one that travels the fastest and can deliver messages from one planet to another. Now, in Greek mythology, this is Hermes. In Roman mythology, it's Mercury. Okay, now I will say this: just because I do Western tropical whole signs astrology does not mean that I limit mythos about the planets, stars, and zodiacs to the Greeks and Romans. That's just one pantheon that has been placed upon the planets, but they do not own the planets nor the planets' histories. And we can see that in different other types of astrology traditions. So Vedic, you're going to have more that is aligned with Hindu and Hindu gods and prescriptions. You also have the other types of ways to run the astrology chart and understand it. Now, I do work through and in the colonial project, so I run the chart through Western tropical whole signs, but I don't stick with just the Greeks and Romans, because those were societies that were still heavily patriarchal, right? They were very heavily patriarchal societies. There were also, especially the Romans, were slave economy societies, and because of that, they do give us an understanding of modern society, because the modern Western nation state is literally based upon and through the imagination of those who saw Rome as the embodiment of democracy. So like I said, I think I said this in a TikTok video or something, that we are living in the imagination of folks who only could imagine Rome. And so this is why it's so raggedy right now. Okay. Now I say that to say this is why for me, Mercury is not just kind of Hermes that goes between the worlds. Mercury itself to me is the crossroad, is what we call in my tradition the man at the crossroad. It would be Elagua Eshu, maybe it would just be the man at the crossroad if you only do hoodoo. There's ways that for me, Mercury is the one who can deliver messages from both worlds, or all other sides. So if that is the purpose of Mercury, and it's communicative, it runs communication, it is the fastest planet, it goes back and forth, so it's retrograde, it asks us to review and reflect. When I think about Mercury, I think about the crossroads, the liminal space where sacred and mundane meet. This is also where chaos resides alongside calm, everything all at once. So this to me is why I love Sinners so much as a movie, Ryan Coogler's Sinners, because especially that juke joint scene, I don't want to give away too many spoilers there, but that juke joint scene to me is the embodiment of the crossroad. Everything happening at once. Everything happening at once, because that is the location of communication between the sacred and mundane. So when you go to that crossroad, when you have to communicate, the only way you can do so in a space that everything's happening at once is you got to find your feet. You must find your feet to be able to navigate its courses so that you can make the decision about what road you go on. If not, then the decision will be made for you. And that's where the trickster energy comes in, using a trick to help you learn the lesson regardless, right? Because a choice must be made. I recently went to this play in Chicago on its last day this past Sunday called Burst or Bust. I really loved it. It was an Afrofuturist play. And the premise of the play was that something happened, and there's two incidents that happened in which both a older black gentleman and a younger black boy had an altercation with some type of law enforcement. And as that law enforcement officer was about to enact violence through the shooting of a gun in both ways, like this kind of bust happened, and both men disappeared. Well, the man and the boy disappeared, and they ended up in this liminal space called the bust. And so the older gentleman is talking to the younger gentleman, and really he is helping the young gentleman grapple with his emotions, with his anger, with his rage of injustice, and how in that moment when he made a choice, he said, I had a choice to make. Could I let this man shoot me and kill me, or if I know I was going to die, I could take him out with me. And I thought that line was so indicative. That is such a Mercury embodiment, right? There is a choice. Even if the choice is shit in shit, there is still a choice. So what choice do you make? And it's not always going to be necessarily easy, but it is very straightforward. You got to make a choice. And if not, the choice is made for you. So this is to me the essence of Mercury. And it's a running theme that we see a lot lately, right? In media and film right now. We are seeing Mercury be very loud. We are seeing the crossroads be very vocal in the fact that it is here and it is time for us to make the decision. It is time for us to take our authority back. And we're particularly seeing this in various Black American artists right now, from musicians like Beyonce and Kendrick and Doechii that have decided to move more into culturally regional and ancestral lines, right? To Coogler giving us new mythos to work with as he presents what I call sinners as a parable of the cost of freedom at the crossroads. These are examples of people who are at crossroads in their lives and have made decisions that center where they come from versus centering who they were told they're supposed to be by society. Okay. And so again, Mercury is ruled by Gemini, which is air, and Virgo, which is earth. So since we are currently in a Virgo South Node transit, it's really asking us to release the ways our communication and relationship to knowing has been tied to rigid ways of knowledge production. Right? Virgo is seen as critic, seen as critical, seen as kind of the nag, seen as needing to have order to things. But in reality, Virgo is sisters with Pisces. That axis is kind of a mess. And that is not a negative at all. Virgo and Pisces have to work through mess, have to kind of grapple in the mess of life to figure out then what the hell do they want to do. Virgo does it in a quote unquote systematic way, and Pisces does it through the kind of wading in the deep waters way. But that's also because we are trained that way. We are trained in these societies that believes it can own time, it can mark time, and in marking time, somehow it can be in control. And so control is really a big part of Virgo as a way to somehow have some kind of order. But does it really give you order, or does it give the illusion of it? Right? Because Virgo is really about the body. This is about knowing through the body, having the body become a new logic. Because if the mind is one way we communicate, again, Mercury being the communication planet of air, then if Virgo is the other side of communication, the body, that would to mean logically, again, the logic. Strong structural analysis for a sound spiritual practice that is culturally contextualized. Again, my Trinity. Then the logic would mean that our body's logic also is part of our knowing. So the South Node in Virgo, North Node in Pisces is saying, baby, you got to release all of that shit. How can you hear and feel your body if it's all tied up and rigid? You got to let it flow. You got to be messy. This is the axis again of mess. Can we work with it? Can we go into the Piscean deep waters? Can we allow ourselves to figure out what faith is, but faith in us, faith in the self, faith in what and is and who you know, right? So what happens if you release all the supposed tos and lean into the knowing that is sitting in your body? So that is why your emotions matter. I get so emotional, baby, right? Like we have all kind, again, songs. We have so many songs and stories just helping us figure out how to work with our emotions because our emotions talk to us. So can we listen and talk back? Okay, so the body is coming alive and we need to listen to it because Uranus and Taurus, these past few years have been again shaking up the fixed foundations that we're most rooted in. And so the way it is doing that is it's getting into the skin, into the bones, and getting us to feel so we can know what the body is saying. So we're still talking about Mercury, but since Uranus is the higher octave of Mercury, we also got to figure out what Uranus is doing. And since Uranus is saying, yes, baby, we got to learn, we got to know things are going to happen quick. I got to shake up the foundations to get you to believe your own shit. South Node Virgo with Uranus and Taurus. Now we got this Mercury, Gemini new moon with Mercury hanging out there. This is about different ways of communicating, y'all. And we can't just rely externally to, again, technologies like AI because we have to be able to discern what is actually being spoken back to us, all right? And so the way we got to do this, again, is getting into the body. And so I see Uranus and Mercury telling a story right now that is getting loud as Uranus is going to make its way into Gemini, a place it really likes to be in. Do you have discernment? Can you discern the information not only coming to you, but all of the things that are going to be kind of downloading in you as well, especially when Uranus moves into Gemini? Can we ground in the body so that we understand what is being said to us and who is talking and why? So then who and what do you believe? And if we believe ourselves, it means we believe our body and what the body is saying, which means we believe our emotions. Because again, that is the logic the body uses to communicate. It's a communication style, but it is also one of the main communication styles that has been demonized over space and time. Because why? It has been feminized. And in a patriarchal, a white Christian patriarchal society that needs and requires violence to maintain itself, it must then demonize the thing that can push back against it because it makes no logical sense. So that it's going to be your body, that it's going to be your emotions, and those who are seen by society to embody that state of being as the first presenting one, which then is going to be what we consider women, femme, the feminine. So again, what happens if we take that back and break, bend, Aries and Venus, bend the things that we have been taught are gender, love, relationships, and the like. Now, before I get into the yapping, I have a free program actually that if folks are interested to learn how to work with their emotions, I want to highlight here. So a few years ago, I did this program called Rage to Heal that was sponsored by the Center for Black, Brown, and Queer Studies. Okay, and it's a way that I personally developed to learn how to talk to my body because I was in a lot of anger and rage, especially around 2018-19 as I was deciding to leave my career in higher education because I was burnt out and I was tired of the plantation politics. So what I did was I brought a structural analysis into personal reflection. Again, my Trinity, y'all, I'm gonna keep saying it. A strong spiritual practice, it's a sound structural analysis that is culturally contextual, right? So this is the beginning of me kind of developing a logic to be able to work with that. And so if you're interested, it's free. It's called Rage to Heal. You can find it on my website. I'll also put it in the show notes below. It's a 7-part series. Each episode is about like 10 minutes. There's prompts with it. And so it takes you on a journey to help you learn how to work with I use rage as the emotion, but it's really any emotion you want to work with as a means to quote unquote heal. So that's out there for folks interested. And I'm also working on the kind of next iteration of this that's called embodied strategic dreaming. So what happens when we actually embody our reality and understand that that is what is going to help us learn to dream, and our dreams are the strategies we need to be able to create these new realities say we want. So it's kind of a 9-week program, and then process right now of working through it. If you're on my Patreon, you are all getting a beta test of this right now because I'm combining kind of astrological assessment and logic alongside again structural analysis and alongside a spiritual understanding of our relationship to ourselves and one another as humans into a program that will kind of walk you through what does it mean to embody your dreams and then have those dreams and bring them into reality. So be on the lookout for that, y'all. I plan to launch that program fully in the fall. But again, if you're on my Patreon, you are already getting that kind of beta testing. I'm doing a 2-for-1 with y'all. So if you're interested in working with me and learning from me and kind of engaging with me and learning how to embody your dreams strategically, join the Patreon, y'all. And you essentially get a preview of a lot of the things that I'm cooking before I bring them out to the public. Okay. All right. So what are we talking about this week? So we have all of these different kind of themes going on and energies going on and all these transitions. So what does all this mean? To me, honestly, this is really about the cultural worker and our responsibility to transmute their offerings. So what do I mean by that? I was talking about how I had went to that play, Burst or Bust. The day before, I got a chance to go to the Cowboy Carter tour in Chicago. It was great. That's my first time seeing a Beyonce concert, and that woman, I don't care if you like her or not, the woman is a performer. She is doing her job, right? And when I was thinking about that tour, or that tour, the concert, along with the play that I had seen, Both of them spoke to themes that I've talked about here for a while, namely the idea of the crossroads and making a choice of what and where you're going and knowing where you come from so you can figure out where you are trying to go by coming back into the body. And we do this by reorientating our foundations of where we think we come from. This is about origin stories. What we're seeing here is this kind of return to origins and the stories that we rest upon in order to make decisions from. And so we need different stories about where we come from and who we are. And as a collective that's undergoing the dismantling of structures and systems, we have come to know it's time to reorientate our senses. This is what this energy is speaking of to me, because we're going into fire and air. Fire and air enter the chat. And it's a lot of masculine energy, right? But the thing is, we don't know how to work with masculinity. All we have been shown and seen through space and time in the modern era is patriarchy, patriarchy through a Christian nationalist lens, right? But now we are being asked to take action, air and fire, masculine energies. And when I say this, y'all, don't think rigid binary gender, okay? We all embody masculine and feminine energy, and we are asked to kind of enact or receive depending upon what's going on. But structurally, the ways that that has been shown to us is through absolute violence or absolute fealty, and that shit don't work. And so what we're seeing that these kind of cultural workers, as I'm calling them, the musicians, the artists, the ones who are giving us different templates, different possibilities, different ways to play, they are saying and giving and showing us that this is how you enact something differently. So do we take up the mantle? What do we do with the offerings they are given to us? This is how we face patriarchy. Like I said last week, we are being asked to face patriarchy by learning how to take action for ourselves. And these examples that we're giving, the examples that I gave, right, again, are the different templates. What I loved about Beyonce's tour or that show is that she was showing us what it looks like to venerate our dead, to venerate where we come from, not just in our bloodline, but also community-wise, culturally. And culturally, she's a Black woman from the South, right? Black woman from Texas. That is a culture of land, a culture of people, a culture of music, and a particular type of music. And so when you go to you go to the concert, her visuals, beautiful. I wish I had just the visuals alone were telling a story beautifully of how she learned from and works with them, but does not consume them. She then transmutes it into her own way of doing it, her own genres, right? Genres are a funny little thing, funny little concept, right? Who gave us the boundaries and who says that that is the only way we can create? Creation does not know boundaries, yet we are told that we can only create within the boundaries. Who the hell can color inside the lines and actually make something new if the lines are already predetermined for you? So we are seeing those who are daring to take up the mantle of revealing to us once again what true creation is. You break shit, right? So what does it look like if we broke things? Broke the relationship that we have to these structures that says we can only do things a certain way. And so again, when I'm looking at what Beyonce did, she transmuted. She took something that was a slight. She took something that when that Country Music Awards said, you don't belong here, even though she'd been country her whole life, right? She took it, said, fine, I'm going to take it, go back to my pen and fuck it up again. Right. And she completely created basically a dissertation. That Cowboy Carter is a dissertation. Again, I don't really care if you like her or not. That's not the point. That's actually not the point. What is the artistic product being presented and what does it do for the social lexicon? Well, that broke a lot of things. It broke the idea of genres. We're having conversations. Now people were doing history lessons. People are going back and understanding the banjo. People's expertise then was able to have a space place at the table. So you saw folks making videos, doing their own music, feeling as if they could now be seen because there was always Black country artists, right? But yet the perception and the image of society via the media gave this image that somehow country was just white and essentially male and coming from a certain location. Well, who constructed that and is it actually true? So when we meet origin stories with different origin stories, what happens is truth can come to the table. But truth is a nasty bitch when you are in a structure that has told the truth to go sit on the side and presented its own illusion of truth, right? And they're calling that fact. So now we're breaking all of that. And this is why we're having fire and air. And it's really revealing. It's really revealing the cracks at the foundations of identity, how we relate to one another, and how we are told to relate to one another when things happen that break that idea of performance. And I'm really talking about, in particular, the Diddy case right now. And this is a trigger warning because there's a lot of sexual violence with that case, okay? But we are seeing an example of this about having to face the patriarchy, reaction versus embodiment, and knowing and who and what we believe and why, and how we construct belief through this Diddy case, right? And all of the kind of commentary online and in the media about it. Because this is a case about, yes, it's RICO, but it's sex trafficking, it's domestic violence, it's sexual coercion. It's a case that is also indicting us. And when I say us, I mean the public. So what the hell have we learned? Because that man was doing this shit for a very long time. In the I'm old enough to remember those early 2000s, right? When he had those Making the Bands, when he was sitting there telling people, grown ass people, to walk 6 miles for a fucking slice of cheesecake because he could. Because he wanted to see what people would do for so-called success and wealth. And every time people kept doing it, he went further and further and further, right? And even when people were speaking out, people weren't speaking out just now, they were speaking out then. People were upset by the way he treated folks on those shows, the way he yelled at folks. He threatened to hit a choreographer on live TV. And he was still given a seat at the table. He was still invitations. He was still seen as the quote unquote king. Of course he was, because that is the premise upon which the society is built upon. Western nation state making projects are nothing more than a reinterpretation of that feudalistic monarchy that's coming out of England. I mean, coming out of Europe, excuse me. England being us in the US, but overall European monarchical rule that is top down, that kind of divine right of kings, right? That gives people this idea and permission that they are literally gods on earth. When you make yourself a god, you dehumanize yourself. Deification and dehumanization, all right? There is a way that when you deify somebody, you also dehumanize them because they no longer have status as a human. That's a problem, right? So when we deify people, we give them the ability to enact all kinds of violence and we justify it. If we can justify it for them, then what happens? We figure out how to justify it for and to ourselves. Facing the patriarch. Because now we got people who are doing all kinds of mental backflips about Cassie should have left. Why didn't do this? Well, she wanted to do this. Well, that wasn't really trafficking because she agreed to. She was over the age of 19. And that is honestly the most disingenuous argument, but it does show just how rooted people are in maintaining the patriarch because you're afraid of that patriarch yourself in one way, shape, or form. Right? Or you want to become that patriarch. So you move that forward, you move the logic to the most illogical things, because if we took that logic, then that can be faced right back to you. Why do you stay then? Why do you stay at that raggedy ass job? Why do you stay in that raggedy ass house? Why do you let your parents talk to you any kind of goddamn way? Or your lover or your friend, right? Why didn't you leave? We stay every day in situations that we feel that we are beholden to in one way, shape, or form. But yet we are telling a 19-year-old, 21-year-old, anyone who is in the limelight of God, which is the king on earth that we have made, right? We are telling them that they are supposed to walk away against power when we also see the ways that power ensured that that woman had to stay, right? So the illogics are there, but yet if we fall within the illogics, then we are giving up our authority and power once again to an entity that already told us it does not care about us. So fire and air, baby. Fire ignites, right? It brings light to a situation. It provides heat, but it must be respected. For a single spark can light up and burn down more than it was intended. So this is why we have air. Air is discernment. It's the helper. When air picks up, things can change in an instant. This is Uranus at its finest, right? Air and Uranus go hand in hand. And this is what I actually liken to the energy of Oya, right? Oya as air, as breath, as sudden change, but also as the one in Lisa and Lukumi, or in the quote unquote new world, is also the one that sits at the cemetery. That's not necessarily the same if it's out of Nigeria. So I'm also going to say that. But Oya as the energy of change, as the one who is lightning, will come down with that machete and shake shit up. You don't call down air. You don't call and work with Oya if you ain't ready for change, right? And even if you think you're ready, you still ain't ready. Ask me how I know. That's also the beauty of it, right? It's about life and air. So, what are we breathing life into? Okay, what are we breathing life into versus what is choking our life, taking our air, suffocating it, and then igniting things with it? All right. It's how we communicate and think and explore in the places that are not tangible. This is flexible energy that needs us to be open to the direction it can take us. So when air takes flight and fire ignites, you got to be grounded in the body so you can be a conduit to work through it. All right. And so this is what I'm seeing now. Don't react. There is ways that people want the reaction. We are taught to feed off of people's reactions. What happens if you realize that these conversations, these logics, these kind of stories that we are being fed, even as we are seeing evidence of violence, of scarcity, we are being shown that we can believe and trust our realities, right? Well, so at the same time, these logics are still coming up. This is when we have to move conversations. This new energy, new moon in Gemini, alongside the conversation with Pluto, and then all of this fire with the inner planets, to me, it's saying, y'all, we got to move these conversations. We got to move what we're putting our breath into. We got to move so that we can actually take action on what we want. Okay? And so Saturn in Aries and this new moon in Gemini in the same week to me is an invitation to get disciplined and matured in our wants and how we speak about them. What needs to flow from our tongues so that the fire is ignited in the spaces that it needs to be in? So let me tell you something. Just because the gun or the sword may be deadly, but so is the goddamn voice. So is the tongue. I always say my tongue is sharp and seasoned, so you got to be able to handle a lot of it if you want to handle what comes from it, right? And that is both Mercury in Virgo, conjunct my MC in 11th house, that is also conjunct Sappho, alongside just being a daughter of the fire. I'm a daughter of Shango, right? So there's a way that I've had to learn to work with fire my whole life, because if I didn't, it would literally burn me up. I would physically get hot. Again, inflammation in the body. So we have to be able to be grounded so that it can flow through, not get stopped up. So this reminds me actually of the recent burning of the Nottoway plantation, in Louisiana, which was the largest antebellum plantation that was built in 1859 by enslaved peoples. Now it burnt down last Thursday when a fire broke out and took that whole house down. Fire clarifies, fire clears, fire makes a way for something new to grow. So let it burn. What needs to burn? And can we ground in our bodies our knowing to plant new seeds that can grow into the futures we say we want? That plantation burning down ignited a lot of discourse online. And quite frankly, a lot of folks were like, let that motherfucker burn. This idea that we need monuments and memorials to remember what was in the past, when that past itself is not even remembered in the present by the state, is absolutely illogical. Those are sites of exploitation, of violence, of the subjugation and dehumanizations of peoples across centuries, right? Across space and time. That plantation was built to show the kind of architectural feats that can happen when you have enslaved labor. You can't have a house that goddamn big and be able to bring that kind of revenue in if you actually are paying folks for their labor. And this is the thing, y'all, that is skilled labor. Go out there and try to build you an antebellum house and talk about how that's not skilled labor, right? They brought enslaved folks over who knew how to do different things, who knew how to and could work that land, okay? And in doing so, they got worked. There is blood on that land. There was sacrifice made on that land that was not done by those who wanted to do it. It was done in protest. Right? So if the land is also revolting, if the land is calling out and says no more as well, and fire comes in, fire burns, fire clears, fire clarifies. So then do we allow its embers in its wake? What are we creating? What are the new origin stories we need? People are saying, well, that's a landmark. That's an historical landmark. We need it to remember. But again, if the state is actively getting us to disremember, if it is telling us that slavery either really didn't exist or it wasn't that bad, when you went into those plantations, only a few actually speak about the horrors of the plantation system itself, the Whitney plantation being only one of them. But those plantations tend to be run by and owned by Black folks who are ensuring that the history is not forgotten. That is very different than a plantation that became a resort that people go to and have weddings and anniversaries at and drive around and bike on, who think that those masters, those so-called enslavers, were benevolent creatures. If we can in the present day say that those who owned other people were benevolent, what kind of fantasy and imagination are we living in? Let the motherfucker burn. Fire clears, clarifies, and it provides light. It gives source. So now that that fire has gone up, what's happened was opening up the historical record, the history itself, the stories, who's being centered and why, whose perspective is privileged. And again, if we won't even acknowledge and teach the goddamn history in the classes to begin with, because all we're doing is banning books or regurgitating and spitting out history as fucking historical fantasy, then fire has done its job. All right? Fire has done its job. Why? Because the dead are here. Pluto in Aquarius is also about the dead. I said this before and I'll keep on saying it. It's how we communicate with them. It's our relationship to it. So what would it look like to remember them by remembering who we are? Right? What does it look like to remember our dead by remembering who we actually are? What messages do the dead have? And do we know how to listen and discern which ones to take seriously? All right. So the idea of fire that brings up and resurrects an historical past that has been made to, in this kind of imagination, a fantasy that is completely contradictory to the lived experience and reality of those who suffered under those oppressive systems and their offspring who are still having to negotiate these fucked up systems, right? This is another example of identity breaking. Our identities to these structures and systems and how they are telling us we should perform them is going. Because if we stop becoming docile to them, because fire ignites and air helps us take flight as long as we are discerning, then what comes next is completely a new story. All right. I'm going to stop there because we're going to talk about this idea of identity breaking and new stories next week, because we're going to have Venus meeting Chiron as well as the Sun and Mercury having a conversation as well. And then the moon will be conjunct the South Node in Virgo. So this is all energy of having to face not only the self, but it's learning how to rework it. So identity is breaking. What comes in its place? All right, y'all. So that's what we got this week for Yapping with the Stars. Now, before we leave, I got a couple of announcements about some offerings that I have. So one, if you're in the Chicago area, May 22nd, I'll be performing. Yes, you heard that, performing. Why? Because I am an artiste. I'm a poet along with a budding musician who's putting my poetry to music in collaboration with my friend, my co-conspirator, and my co-creator, Forrest Brooks, and we're part of Shine Marinage. So we're going to be at Dorothy Downstairs doing our first performance called Dreams of Pleasure, A Sonic Journey. And it's a combination of poetry, music, and storytelling as a way to call down the spirit of pleasure and the ancestors that can help us work with it. So it really is an experience. It's the best way I can describe it, and you got to see it to understand it. So if you're in the Chicagoland area, May 22nd, come on out to Dorothy Downstairs. I'll have tickets available. I'll have ticket link in the show notes below. And if you miss buying it online, you can purchase tickets at the door. So don't worry if you miss the online purchases. Come on out before 7 o'clock on Thursday, May 22nd to Dorothy Downstairs, and you can see your girl performing. I'm going to be all in my Shango glory, okay? Now, on top of that, I do have some new offerings. So if you've been interested in kind of getting a reading with me and or learning with me, here's how you can do that. On my website, under Astrology Services, you're going to see my Embodied Futures Lab. That is one arm of my work. And through that lab, I do astrological assessment. And I do offer one-on-one reading. So my signature reading is called Journey to Self reading. It's an hour-long reading. It's on Zoom. All of my readings are live and they are recorded, and I'm talking with you. Because for me, again, astrology has to have stories put to it. And so I need to hear your stories alongside me just giving an analysis. So Journey to Self readings are available. They're online. I also have certificates available. So if you want to gift a Journey to Self reading for somebody, you can do so as well. Now, I got a new reading that I'm going to be testing out this summer because I've been doing it with a few folks. And if it lands, I'll keep it. And it's called the Graduation and Life Transition Reading. So these are for folks who are graduating either undergrad, grad school, professional school, or you're just in a life transition. You are got a promotion, you are moving jobs, you are leaving a job, you are retiring, any kind of crossroad transition in life, this reading could be for you. It's a combination of both natal and transits. So that's the astrology assessment of it, alongside my knowledge as a cultural and organizational strategist. So before I worked for myself, I was in higher education for the last 20 years, from student and faculty and administrator. And I worked not just with students in a kind of teaching and advising and mentoring capacity, but I also did that with faculty and administrators, namely presidents and their councils. And I would do a lot of strategizing with them, goal setting, and then taking goals and putting them into reality by centering their humanity. So I've always been doing this kind of centering humanity work. I've just now taken it out of institutions and brought it down into my own kind of world. And so this reading is a combination of both astrology assessment and strategy. And so that's why it's a little bit more, both in price, but also in time. And from there, you'll also get a prescription. And we're also going to be working a bit with music with that. I find that when you're in transitions in life, the bringing in kind of creative outlets really does help to make sense of these kind of crossroad moments. So those are available on my website. I've also got other offerings, namely things like astrology salon. So if you want to bring you and 5 of your friends together and have kind of a fun gathering, either online or in person with me, we can look at your charts, both individually and collectively, and really think about what does it mean to dream as a group. So I do that both in salon style formats, but also for organizations. The last organization I worked with was out of Northwestern, the Digital Apothecary Lab, run by Dr. Moya Bailey. And so there I worked with her lab assistants and graduate students, ran assessments of them astrologically, individually, and then brought them together because I looked at how their charts kind of talk to one another in relationship to the goals of the lab. And so we did a big incubation to help folks kind of figure out how to take those dreams and bring them into reality, working with the energies that they all had together. So those are some examples of some of the offerings I have through my Embodied Futures Lab. So if you want to learn more, go to drnicolerouse.com, okay? All right, y'all. So keep dreaming, keep exploring. It is through the dreamscapes that we can bring the future we say we want into the present. Till next time. I don't want to be right. I just want to be free. Like Michelle sang. The tides, where we come from. The light that lit the way for our ancestors in the dark of night, when they had to leave the spaces that tried to steal their breath and life. Reworking, while also learning how to work with the land that was also being worked. A land and people under duress. The trees did not ask if they wanted to participate in such brutal practices. Yet here they were. Here we are. All beholden to a power structure that only knows how to take and never to give, while telling us this is the right way to live. So I don't want to be right. I just want to be free. As Michelle sang, the cosmos. The cosmos. We'll learn to imagine that freedom lied in parable of the sower that sowed the seeds of Earth's seed that wanted to bring humans back to the stars, to start again, to start anew. Remember where we come from and who we are. The stars that lit the way, that guide the light. The moon that holds the tides of the waters. Our connection to earth and land. As above, so below. Yet we don't know, because we have lost the above and the below. So I don't want to be right. I just just want to be free and journey to the cosmos.